see what you mean. Sweaty palms would be really annoying if you're an incorporeal hand. Oh, hey guys, didn't see you there. Oh, these guys? No, they're chill. 1 second. Hey, do you guys mind if we catch up, like, after I'm done here? Yeah, no, I'll just meet you backstage. Yeah, see ya. Okay, sorry about that. I was terrified when those hands dragged me into the abyss last episode, but they were actually really cool. Just goes to show you should never judge a book by its cover. Which reminds me, I wanted to talk to you guys about the Roaring Knight again. I've been thinking about it a lot, going over everything we know about the Knight. Visual and circumstantial similarities aside, Des doesn't really make as much sense as I initially thought. I mean, look at that. Antlers, bat, don't forget, promise. It all seemed pretty conclusive at the time, but there really are only a few things we even know about Des. Yes, she's a holiday and thus presumably a deer. Yes, she likes baseball bats. And of course, she's really not that present in the town. But that point is perhaps not as much of a pro for her being the Knight as much as it is a con. Most of our connections to Des paint her as lost, including in-game music, lines from Spamton, and meta content from the Spamton sweepstakes and other sources. It seems clear that we have to find her, and the Roaring Knight doesn't seem like a character that we really need to find. Kris knows who they are, and what they're doing. And they even have a direct phone line to the Knight, or at least someone in league with them. And perhaps most clearly, the Knight makes their way to the shelter through the Light World. If Des could just walk into the Light World so easily, us needing to find her seems rather dubious. And her motivation kind of withers away. I mean, maybe she can only be in the Light World for a short time, but I don't know, it just seems unlikely at this point. So perhaps it isn't Des after all. I still feel like Des was there when the Gaster experiment went down, but I think that she's been lost and is still lost in the original Dark World. And that of course begs the question, who is the Knight and what are they after? Is the Knight Carol? No, that would be far too obvious. And besides, Carol doesn't behave like the Knight. The Knight is over the top, cocky, and wields a bat that turns into a sword or knife or whatever that's supposed to be. Carol also uses swords, sure, but why doesn't she just bring a sword when she clearly has multiple? Why does she bring what appears to be a bat at first? And actually, that's also another point against Des. Des uses bats. Wouldn't her Dark World weapon reflect that? Why does it become a sword and not like, I don't know, a club or a mace? Those would be more ideal bat-like weapons, but no, it becomes a sword. We need to look for someone that would use a bat that becomes a sword. Someone with a childish streak in them, who would like to have fun with their prey. And what other clues do we have? Well, we know that Toby likes leitmotifs, so let's start with that. Now, there may be more, but there are at least 3 noticeable leitmotifs in the song Black Knife, which is the theme that plays when you fight the Roaring Knight. We'll start from the back and work our way forward. The last leitmotif that I could identify was the Lost Girl leitmotif, which, yeah, I mean, that seems pretty Des. But then again, Des seems scared and lost when we hear her, so probably not her. It could be anyone close to Des though, and those antlers do seem to make it a holiday, so maybe Carol after all? Or maybe even Rudy? I don't know, let's keep going. The next leitmotif that we can find is from the cliffs of Chapter 1. This makes a lot of sense. The area has clear ties to the Titans and thus the Roaring Knight. Not much to gather here it seems. Let's continue. The first leitmotif that we would actually hear when we start playing this song is by far the most subtle, though I'm not the first one to notice it. I've been seeing a lot of people mention it online. The leitmotif that starts this song is a simple drum track, but it's got extreme implications. The track is from Undertale and it's called Burn in Despair. It plays during the first part of the second phase of the Asriel fight. Now, this could be simply building tension, linking the Roaring Knights to the idea of a final boss or a horrific threat. After all, this version of Asriel is referred to as the God of Hyper Death. Kind of crazy name there, buddy. Anyways, it could be nothing, but I don't know if it is nothing. This song is rhythmically similar to the Heartache leitmotif, one shared with all of the Dreamers. What if this connection is an intentional hint at the character of the Roaring Knight? What if the Roaring Knight isn't Des at all? What if it's Asriel? When I first had this thought, I was on call with Captain Squance, and at first it seemed like a funny crack theory. But as I looked into it deeper, I have to say, it's actually kind of scary how well this would actually work. For starters, Asriel is supposed to be at college, but that would make for too perfect of a cover-up. It explains why Asriel would be gone for so long, while also giving him the perfect alibi if someone ever saw him around town. It also explains why his computer would still have open programs when you check them in Chapter 1. And while we're on the topic of computers, let's talk about another one. Queen from Chapter 2 made rooms for many of the residents at the town. We can see rooms for Kris, Susie, Birdly, Catly, Jockington, and Asriel. When we check Asriel's room, we're told that you opened the door with your eyes closed. You saw nothing. At the time, I personally thought this was due to Kris's emotional state, maybe not wanting to see for themselves. But now, this is clearly part of a bigger pattern. Kris knows that there's something in that search history that made that room that they don't want us to see. It's potentially possible that Asriel has been searching for something related to his work in the Dark Fountains, or perhaps just something that happened recently. And therefore, if he's doing something recently, it would let us as the players know that he's not at college at all. And if he's not here having a good time with us, he must be up to something he doesn't want others to know about. It's fully consistent with Kris's actions in other chapters regarding the night in the shelter as well. Kris tries to keep us from seeing the code in the guitar, and in the church they keep us from opening the door in the back, one said to be big enough for a large person. At first I thought that this was going to be used in the weird route, but up to this point it hasn't been. When you try to turn the doorknob, you're told, you turn the doorknob, you don't do anything else. Kris is keeping us from opening the door, just like they kept us from seeing what's inside Asriel's room in Chapter 2. And it's presumed, probably accurately by fans, that this door is hiding the Roaring Knight. Which, if it is kind of a scary similarity to draw between Asriel and them. If that was it, I could easily consider it a simply circumstantial evidence. But there's a lot more. Like, a lot more. We know that the people who have access to the shelter have symbols associated with them. One is a pine tree, likely representing Carol. One is Asgore, who has a black shard and could be represented by either the Deltarune or the police badge. And the third is currently a mystery, though they must be represented by either the badge or the Deltarune, whichever one doesn't represent Asgore. Who could these two symbols represent? Well, the badge represents either Undyne or Asgore. Undyne does get taken by the Knight at the end of Chapter 3, which could be another attempt to keep us out of the loop, but Undyne is obviously not working with the Knight, so it probably wasn't her. We could therefore assume that the badge is Asgore. Okay, so we've done a little bit of research since I wrote the script, and turns out that actually Alphys does tell you that she has seen Undyne going into the shelter. So, badge might be Undyne after all. We're gonna just keep it in, but yeah, just know that. That leaves us with the Deltarune. The best candidate for this is either Toriel or Asriel, as they are the only two characters in Undertale and Deltarune with the closest associations to the symbol. It could be Toriel, as the Knight is here in this Dark World to kidnap her specifically, but again, she isn't working with the Knight, and if the Knight can get into the bunker, then they must know the code. The Knight almost certainly isn't Asgore based on physical appearance and how they hold themselves, so the Knight is probably not represented by the badge. If Carol or Des is the Knight, then that would mean that the Knight is the Pine Tree, thus clearing the Deltarune for Toriel. But again, today we're operating under the assumption that it isn't either of them, or Rudy, for the reasons that we've already mentioned. That means that the symbol associated with the knight is the Deltarune. And if Toriel isn't the knight, then that leaves the others associated with the rune. Any member of the choir or the reverend wouldn't make much sense thematically, so if it isn't Toriel, it must be another dreamer. Maybe Kris? I mean, I guess, but though I said it in my last video, they don't actually open the door to the shelter in Chapter 3. The door opens for them. That just leaves Asriel, and Asriel is absolutely the being with the most ties to the Deltarune. It's literally a symbol depicting him in Undertale. Speaking of the Deltarune, this isn't the only place that we see it in-game. The prophecies of Chapter 4 show it quite frequently, as does the prophecy of Chapter 1. By the way, can we talk about Chapter 1's prophecy real quick? We were told in Chapter 1 that our goal was to banish the angels' heaven. Now we know that our goal is to close the fountains and prevent the roaring, and keep the titans from appearing. So whatever happened to the angels' heaven? What does that even mean in the first place? Well, we now know that the titans are angelic in appearance, or at the very least the one in the church is. It features wheel-like wings that cover its face, referencing both cherubim and seraphim. And it also has a black hue and twisted horns, drawing forth demonic symbolism. And as we know, the greatest of demons in the Bible, Lucifer, fell from heaven, first as an angel, and now as a fallen star. Asriel too is an angel, and no, not just in Undertale or Deltarune. The name Asriel is derived from the name of the angel of death in some Jewish and Muslim traditions, an angel named Asriel. In the Semitic languages like this, vowels are often omitted, meaning that Asriel and Asrael are actually the same name, in the same way that Muhammad and Mohammed would be. This explains Asriel's depiction as the god of hyper-death fairly clearly, as this angel is the angel of death. But it could also explain why the Titans are summoned by the Knight, and why they become angelic. And it could even tell us something about the angel's heaven that we'll get to later in the video. The next point on the through line is attack patterns. I mentioned earlier that Lucifer himself is seen as a falling star, and that wasn't unintentional. Asriel in his game and the Roaring Knight both attack you with attacks that look like stars splitting off and becoming more bullet attack patterns. The Roaring Knight and Asriel also both attack with swords, and the final attack in the Roaring Knight and Asriel fights are almost one-to-one with each other. And while we're talking about how they attack, this would also explain the bat and sword dichotomy, where Carol has and uses swords, and Des has and uses bats. Asriel in his fight uses swords, but he doesn't have access to a sword from what we can see in Deltarune. If he were planning to wield a weapon, he would likely have to seek one out if the need arose for it. If I was right, and Des, Noel, Kris, and Asriel were all present that day that Gaster's experiment went awry, seeing Des sucked into the Dark Fountain would surely prompt him to go after her. And whatever tool might be nearby is all he could grab to defend both himself and her. Of course, the closest such object would be a bat, one that Des would likely have had on her while the four of them were out and about all day. The bat in the light world would be shaped by Asriel's will into a weapon when he made his way into the dark world. And this is also something that we can see with other dark world objects, like Kris's sword coming from a pencil. Now, let's talk about Kris while we're on the topic. Kris and the Knight mirror each other in a lot of ways. The knighting, the aura farming, the swords, the fact that they're both knights and both open dark fountains, heck, even the pointing that they do. There's also a section of the prophecy of the roaring that shows what at first looked like 3 titans, but now very clearly looks like 1 titan flanked by 2 roaring knights. Heck, Tenna even says that the Roaring Knight opened the fountain in Chapter 3, when we literally saw Kris do it in Chapter 2. So it's practically fact that one of these 2 knights is Kris, and the other one is of course the knight we fight at the end of Chapter 3. With them looking and acting so similar, it seems clear that Kris is trying their absolute hardest to emulate the Roaring Knight, or that the emulating is being done by the Roaring Knight themselves. But while Kris may feel some small need to emulate Des, they clearly feel a capital B big need to emulate Asriel. The Castletown Kris room looks exactly like Asriel's side of the Light World room. They wear a shirt that matches what Asriel wears, and they even used to wear a red horned headband to fit in with the Dreamers better. A headband that we assume turns into Ralsei in the Dark World. Their feelings of wanting to be like their older brother fill that headband, and their actions, clothes, and even preferred furniture is all extremely Asriel-like in nature. And now we can see that the Knight is also mirroring a lot of Kris's actions. And well, hey, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, right?
How you like those Apple Jacks?
Okay guys, how are you holding up? We've got a lot of ground left to cover, so buckle up. But I figured now is a good time to invite you to like and subscribe. If you enjoy what you're seeing, you'll want to see more of it, and well, so will others. Liking and subscribing will help us to reach both them and you down the road. So if you feel so inclined, it would mean a lot. And hey, if you really like it, maybe consider joining our channel memberships. You'll get access to custom emojis, and it'll help support us in getting out new content. Win-win! Alright, now that the obligatory YouTuber makes you subscribe break is over, let's get to the real heart of this whole Knight thing. Visual and thematic similarities are cool and all, but what does Asriel gain from being the Knight? Well, it's closely tied directly to our motivations. What we want is to seal the angels' heaven. Heaven has three major definitions. The first is a realm in which God dwells. Cool. The second, the skies above, which, yeah, okay. But it's the third that we're really after in this case. Heaven can be defined as a place or state or experience of supreme bliss. Our goal is to close the connection between the light world and the dark world, and in so doing separate Asriel, the angel, from that heaven after which he seeks. To quote the game, only they can seal the fountains and banish the angels' heaven. Only then will balance be restored and the worlds saved from destruction. The prophecy at the end of chapter 4 rings eerily similar to this. The last prophecy, the story's end. And then when all hope is lost for the tale, the final tragedy unveils. To save the world, there is only one way. A shattered portion, and then, only then will the worlds be saved. There's also a hidden prophecy tying to this one that I'll get to in a second, but in regards to that shattered section, Susie shatters it before we can see what it says. Notably, much of this portion rhymes, so I think that the missing section must not only be bad for Susie and maybe also Ralsei, but it must also rhyme with some other section in here. And since the only section in this portion without a rhyming couplet is the last prophecy, the story's end, as tale rhymes with unveil and saved and way are pseudo rhymes, then that must mean that the last little bit that we have rhymes with end. Not only that, but it should probably be about banishing the angels' heaven, as Ralsei tells us that that's what saves the day. I think that the missing line is something along the lines of, to banish the party's dear friend, making this whole phrase, the last prophecy, the story's end. And then when all hope is lost for the tale, the final tragedy unveils. To save the world, there is only one way. To banish the party's dear friend, only then will the days be saved. This would explain Susie's anger, why she says afterward that she wants to stick with you and Ralsei and everyone else. And it also explains Ralsei's apprehension to tell you the whole story and why Ralsei assumes that the prophecy could be subverted if you're nice enough. After all, it would be really mean to steal away a dear friend. But on that note, I think that there might be a little bit of a tricky pun here. I don't think that this is D-E-A-R. I think it's D-E-E-R. The party's dear friend. Susie assumes that the one that's going to be sealed away is Noelle, but in reality it's Des. Not the girl who found love, but the angel's heaven. You see, there's a secret prophecy in which we read that the angel banished will finally meet with its desire. I think at the end of the day, both Asriel and his heaven, Des, will be banished in the final Dark World as we close it. Asriel and Kris are therefore trying to find Des and slow us down to buy themselves time. They're risking the entire world with their plan, but they're trying to save their old friend and Asriel's love. If we look into Des's closet, we can see that she has one of Asriel's sweaters, which is an extremely clear hint that these two were dating when she disappeared. Do you think Asriel would just move on after someone like that just disappeared? No, he would do everything he possibly could to get her back, searching the Dark World for her until it almost drove him mad. And when we first encounter the Knight, they certainly fit that description to the T, with one tiny caveat. The Knight is crying. Asriel weeps at the hopelessness he feels, unable to find Des after years of searching, and now that search is running out of time. He and Kris do what they can to buy him time, but the story has just one ending. Almost everything about this theory just works too well except for one tiny little detail. The antlers. Those darned antlers are all too holiday to be Asriel's horns. What could I use to possibly explain them? Well, my first thought was that maybe the bat held memories of Des and the armor was an extension of the bat, but I thought about it a little deeper. Although real-world objects often become darkeners in the Dark World, they don't always. Sometimes they become equipment, like Kris's pencil. What if the Knight's amorphous armor was the same? It would be a deer-like object associated with darkness, and maybe an ability to melt. That was when it hit me. The armor, and thus the antlered helmet that accompanies it, may be a piece of Gaster's experiment, one that we've seen before. If Gaster made the first Dark World by extracting a human's determination, he would have needed a device to do that. The DT extraction machine. It was said that Gaster fell into his machine, shattering him across dimensions. What if a piece of his shattered form melded to a small part of that machine, which, upon entering the Dark World, became a suit of armor? One that fuses with the wearer like an amalgamate. One that has holes in its hands like the mystery man W.D. Gaster himself. One made of darkness and determination like the dark fountain that made it and that it itself made. And one that has the antlers of a deer like the Holidays, or perhaps more accurately, like Giftrot. Giftrot is a monster from Undertale notable for its creepy design and for its similarity in appearance to the DT extraction machine. Though the machine has an antlers no longer, it likely once did if that skull is more than an odd decorative choice, and if that skull is from a large Giftrot-like entity. I recognize that there is a major similarity between the antlers of the Roaring Knight and the Holidays that is not shared by Giftrot or the DT extraction machine. But the Knight's appearance, though clearly preferred to some extent, is completely amorphous. Perhaps the antlers have been reshaped to some extent by Asriel's single-minded determination to save Des. Combined with everything else, you have to admit there is something there, right? And for one last comparison, just look at the similarities between the Roaring Knight and the Asriel Hyperdeath form. Those pointed shoulders, those lanky arms, that thin waist. Even the fact that an eye shows up in the middle of the chest, just where that circle is on Asriel's design. These similarities could be convergent or even coincidence, but with everything else, is it really all that likely? Heck, even the fact that everyone agrees it's either Des or Carol is itself big proof that it isn't either of them. Toby is clearly trying to keep this whole thing a secret, so making it so obvious upon first reveal would be a huge misstep. I think that they're both red herrings and that the real Knight must be Asriel. But then again, how anticlimactic would it be if Asriel was the final boss twice in a row? Okay, theory debunked. Come on, mysterious hands, let's get out of here. What, you really thought that was it after all that? Of course not. I don't think Asriel will be the final boss. But if he isn't, who will be? Well, to answer that, we need to turn to another theory. You see, there's a popular theory making its rounds that states that Deltarune's story structure is Undertale's in reverse. The first Dark World that we see is a fantasy land where we fight a king, just like the end of Undertale sees us fight a king in his home, a fantasy that he continues to uphold. The second Dark World is a technological wonderland where we fight a beautiful robot. And if you're careful to explore all of it, Mettaton Neo. And would you look at that? That right there is just Mettaton Neo with Spamton for a head. It's not even subtle. The third sees us against a wildly dangerous TV host. Sound familiar? And the most recent centers around the water sprites, falling water, spirits, and, oh, look at that, it's Gerson. He even fights like Undyne, that's nice. Cool theory. Little problem though, Deltarune has 3 more chapters, whereas Undertale only has 2 more areas. Snowdin and the Ruins. Chapter 5 would line up with Snowdin, which it likely will, seeing as we can probably trust what Gerson has to say about Asgore and his jealousy. Asgore's jealousy is currently centered on Sans, and we meet Sans in Snowdin alongside his brother Papyrus, who, if this theory is correct, we'll finally get to see in Deltarune. Woo woo! That means that the Ruins will line up with Chapter 6, and it's in the Ruins of Undertale where we first see the Deltarune, where we meet Flowey and therefore Asriel, and where we get the first inklings of what happened between Toriel and Asgore. I think it's here that we will get the reveal that Asriel was the knight all along, where we'll learn what happened that day in the shelter and why Toriel and Asriel broke up in this game. But that's only Chapter 6, and we've reached the beginning of Undertale. Where do we go for Chapter 7? Well, you continue past 0, reaching negative integers. We go to before the story started. Before Undertale took place, a lot of the stuff that was going on, the most interesting of which were Gaster's experiments. When we go back and explore the place before the story, I think that's when we'll finally enter the shelter. Finally face down either a conglomerate of Gaster's shattered form, or else the end result of his experiment. Then we find Des, but as time waxes short, we're forced to seal the fountain with her in it. And Asriel, refusing to give up on her, stays with Des. And the angel banished will finally meet with its desire. A final tragedy indeed, and yet in some ways one that is bittersweet. That is, of course, for everyone except for Kris. Kris will lose a beloved friend and an adoptive brother in one fell swoop. Though the two of them may be content with that ending, Kris absolutely wouldn't be. This is what drives Kris's hatred of us. We are literally trying to destroy their whole life. Could we possibly find another way? Only time will tell. So what do you guys think? Personally, I think I absolutely cooked with this one. With so many connections to the Angel and the Roaring Knight themselves, I feel like Asriel actually makes a surprisingly good candidate for the role. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. I hope to see you next week, but until then, this is Outcast Penguin signing off.